Good morning, everyone. My name is Marga, and this is my husband, Peter Goering. I welcome everybody to Sunday service, especially those who are coming to visit the Expanding Light, and those who are the viewers in the internet. Last week, we had the pleasure to having somebody who was watching these Sunday services on the internet for more than a year, and he came to visit us at the Expanding Light from Canada. So please come and visit us. We would love to know you in person. Today's commentary is Race of the One Night, and it's a weekly commentaries from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Ego, friend or foe. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Jesus Christ brings the Beatitudes with the words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." To be poor in spirit in such a way as to merit the kingdom of heaven doesn't mean to be poor-spirited. Rather, it means to see oneself as owning nothing, since all belongs to God. For all is the manifestation of his consciousness. St. Jean of the Cross wrote, "If you would own everything, seek to own nothing. That which the ego relinquishes, offering it up to the soul consciousness, is reclaimed forever in cosmic consciousness. Nothing is ever lost." Paramahansa Yogananda tells the story in Autobiography of a Yogi of the levitating saint Baduri Mahasaya. "Master," said a disciple of this saint once ardently, "you are wonderful. You have renounced riches and comfort to seek God and teaches us." It was well known that Baduri Mahasaya had forsaken great family wealth in his early childhood, when single-mindedly he entered the yogic path. "You are reversing the case," the saint's face held mild rebuke. "I have left a few paltry rupees, a few petty pleasures, for a cosmic empire of endless bliss. How then have I denied myself anything? I know the joy of sharing the treasure. Is that a sacrifice?" The short-sighted worldly folk are verily the real renunciates. They relinquish an unparalleled divine possession for a poor handful of earthly toys. The Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd chapter states, "All things are everywhere by nature wrought. In interaction of the qualities, the fool cheated by self thinks, 'This I did, and that I wrought.' But thou strong-armed prince, a better lesson mind, knowing the play of visible things within the world of sense, and how the qualities must qualify, standeth aloof even from his acts." Thus, through the Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Morning, welcome everyone. I'll start today with a reading from Whispers from Eternity, Prayer Demands by Paramahansa Yogananda. Through the night of errors we pursued the will-o-wisp of false happiness. Gloom heaped upon gloom, and our feet on the path of progress slipped into many ruts and marshes of disillusionment. These deceiving fog-born fires of passions lure many people to their doom. Thousands drown in the marshes of sense satiety. O divine hand, blow out this false torchlight of destruction, which misleads thy blood relations headed for thy home. Burn thy beacon of holy light instead, that thine eager children pilgrims may safely reach thy home. Yogananda defined the ego as the soul identified with the body. And the ego is rightly at the center of the spiritual path, is the enemy of us all. It's the soul nature which is all around us in the universe has become encased in the flesh, in the astral body, in the ideational body, And it's no longer free to realize its oneness with everything else that there is. It's trapped in this ego consciousness. But it's not really that easy. It's more that that soul, we need that step of the ego. It's a progression. And so it's not just that we can say, oh, let's get rid of the ego and we're done. I think we need a greater understanding of the role that the ego plays on the spiritual path and how it can be a friend at times as well as our foe. So when the universe was created, God dreamed it into existence, or he manifested himself out into all creation. In all creation, there's a part of that divine. There's a spark of that consciousness of the divine, whether it be in the rocks or the trees or animals. It's throughout nature. And things are more or less aware of themselves. The rocks don't tend to be very aware of what they're doing. As it says in the Vedic scriptures, it says God sleeps in the rocks, he dreams in the plants, he begins to awaken in the animals, and reaches his full potential within the human beings, the full potential for wakefulness. But how do we get to that wakefulness? In nature, things go on sort of on autopilot, you might say. They're just chunking along. A rock is a rock, and then it's another rock. And then it might get to be a crystal. And then at some point, maybe it makes the jump up to a bacterium or something like that. It takes a long time, and there's a grand plan through this. And it's just the hand of God behind it. It's the consciousness realizing itself. It's the consciousness awakening. But it takes a long, long time. The good thing about in nature is we perceive a sense of harmony in it. There's a sense of things of rightness. It's just going on the way it's supposed to. And we as humans can feel that in nature. When we go out in nature, it's peaceful, and there's a lack of ego consciousness. There's a lack of what Yogananda called the thwarting cross currents of ego consciousness. And we perceive, especially in this day and age of the industrial modern society, we perceive nature as this perfect haven, this place that we want to return to. Well, would that it was that easy. Sure, the rocks and plants and animals they don't have as many hang-ups and complexes as we do. So maybe we should just go back into nature, become the perfect noble savage, as the romantics of the 19th century yearned for. And there are many, many nature writers who are talking about just going back and finding our place in nature. But it doesn't work like that. There are no saints among the snakes. There are no Jivan Muktas among the giraffes. And we have to go through that stage. We have to go to that, we have to go through those long corridors of awakening consciousness till we emerge at last into a sense of, oh, wait a minute, there's something else going on here. And when we emerge from that animal level, and there's a transition there for all the dog lovers. I'm not going to say that dogs don't have consciousness, but when we get to the human level is when there's a nervous system that we can really attain and really perceive. The brain is there, the nervous system is there, the tools are there that we can start to awaken and to perceive that true soul nature. And at this point, as we move into a human birth, Yogananda says it really would be very easy to realize God. You've moved up through all these things. You now have there's a sense of I, a sense of a doer, a sense of agency, a sense of consciousness, of self-awareness of what's going on. And if at that point we could catch it and we could say, of course, I should just keep going and merge with God, it would all be easy. But it doesn't really work that way. And what usually happens is the ego emerges from that long corridor of self-awakening and goes, whoa, look at this. There's all these things I could do. I could get this, I could eat this, I could be that, I could get a spouse over here, I could get involved in this. And hey, if I bonk this person on the head, I can get their stuff. And then and I can control this person over here, and I can get a whole troop of people together, and then we can go and conquer those people over there. And so it goes. And you get caught up, and the Maya or delusion of this world is set up that it's not easy to get out of, and it's infinitely beguiling. There's infinite ways that the ego can get trapped in this sense of, hey, I'm here, I'm an agent, I'm in control, I can do this. And so it goes, lifetime after lifetime, after lifetime, after lifetime, until at some point, and this is where the ego comes back in again, because there's this self-awareness. Again, it's not the animals. Like, for example, it's interesting, in our family we had a pet rat. And rats are actually very, very good pets. They're clean, they're intelligent, they're smart. You just have to get over the tail. But they are really wonderful pets, but they're prone to, I don't know if it's the breed of rats that have come out of the laboratories or what, but they're prone to tumors. And our rats, a number of our rats got tumors. But you know, we started projecting on our poor little rat that, you know, here's this tumor that's growing, and pretty soon it's a half the size of the body, and then it's like 2/3 the size of the body, and it's dragging this thing around. And, you know, we're sort of projecting that there's all this suffering going on, and, you know, it's just, you know, this is a sick rat. It's in poor state. But when you really looked at the rat and you tuned into it, there was no sense that anything was wrong, that there was anything that shouldn't have been. It was just going on what it was, and, well, okay, here's this thing hanging off of me, and just kept moving forward, doing what it was doing. And so the animals don't have that sense, and you need that ego consciousness. And what happens at some point is that we wake up and we go, there's something wrong here. There's something just, you know, life after life, I tried this, I tried this, I tried this. And you get into the anguishing monotony of these lives of ego consciousness, as Master called it. And at that point, the ego is going, there's something wrong. And this is a fundamental point on the spiritual path. In the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, he talks about, the first sutra is, and now we come to the study of yoga. It's because before that, before you can come to the study of yoga, you have to have a realization that there's something wrong, that there's something inherently not right, that there's something else besides this material consciousness. Likewise, the Buddha, Gautama Buddha, his first noble truth. Life is dukkha, life is suffering, life is unsatisfactory. But until we realize that life is unsatisfactory, the ego is just going to be out there going, whoa, okay. But at some point, we realize it doesn't make sense. It's unsatisfactory. We have to do something else. And that is when the spiritual path begins. And that's when the fun begins. Because unless you were one of those very rare people who emerged from animal consciousness and went right for God, you've had about, a million lifetimes at 50, 80 years a lifetime. It's a lot of years reinforcing ego consciousness. So the ego consciousness isn't itself what traps us, but because there's a sense of I, a sense of separation in there, it allows desires to come in. And that's where we get trapped, the desires of the heart, the chitta. Because the chitta says, okay, we need to judge things. Some things are good for the ego, and we like those, and some things are bad for the ego, and we don't like those. So you've got this desires. I like this, I don't like that. Likes and dislikes, duality comes in. And we've had all these lifetimes of this duality building up and storing in little vrittis, these little whirlpools within us. And we now have to fight all that energy, because the ego is there. It realizes something is wrong. But it's also got a huge amount of energy invested in doing things the old way. And so we come to this tension. There's this fight that's between us, inside of us. We know where the right thing wants to go, but we get caught. And there's often points along there where we get more glimpses and more light comes in than others. When I was living in Berkeley many years ago, I had started my friend had brought me to a hatha yoga class, and I had started meditating and starting to get into the spiritual path and beginning to realize a little bit what this was all about, but not really. And at one point, my friend and I, Mark, decided we were going to go visit his sister we were living in Berkeley, which is this very cool place, and we decided we were going to go over the hills and visit his sister, who lived in, its great name, in Pleasanton. So we went out to Pleasanton, and I just have this, it was a real awakening for me, because we got there, and here's this wonderful family. They were a young couple with kids, and Pleasanton was this new development where, everything had their little quarter-acre lawn, and the sidewalks and the schools were all there, and the parks were there, and the 2 cars in the garage, and the 2.2 kids, and the wonderful family room, and the big houses. And here was Mark's sister, who was a wonderful person. It's just that we started talking to her. She was so enmeshed in, okay, well, the kids are doing this, and then they have to do this, and well, we got the car payment, and I'm going to work a night job, and my husband's to do this, and he has to commute to San Francisco. It takes him 3 hours every day, there and back, but, we're making it, it's doing. And I just sort of closed my eyes and said, God, no. And it was, we see what's in us, and it's because, that's sort of where I had come from, suburbia in my life, but it just, at that point, I had never heard the term anguishing monotony, but that's exactly what I felt. I said, oh, God, the anguishing monotony of this. Let's get back to Berkeley. And, it was another push to be on the spiritual path, and I'd love to say that at that point I dropped everything, came up to Ananda, started meditating 3 hours a day, and it didn't quite work like that. It took a while to get into it, and you'd fall back into the things that were, of course, really important, like doing a PhD and studying and all these things. But you get these glimpses, and you have to hang on to those glimpses as they come. You have to put energy into them and keep that realization, because the ego's not always going to come down on the right side. It's going to go back to where it's been for all those many, many years. So there's another way of understanding the ego, which has always been very helpful for me, is the Indian epic, the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata is a ancient epic that's been passed down orally for centuries, written thousands of years ago. It's been now written down, and it comes in varying lengths. You can get the 20-volume length, or you can get the 5-volume length, or down to 1. But there's tremendous teachings in there, many, many good stories. And Master especially gave us the keys to understanding the Mahabharata, because each of the characters in there not only are having wonderful adventures and are wonderful characters and have wonderful values, but they represent certain psychological qualities. And there's one character in particular, Bhishma, who is the ego. And reading those stories of Bhishma and the ego gives us a lot of insight into the nature of the ego, what we need to do in this world to conquer the ego. So the story, as you imagine, 25 volumes in the next 10 minutes isn't quite going to happen, so I'll try to hit the highlights here. And Bhishma comes into the story very early. He's a central figure. As you can imagine, he's this pivotal point up here of the ego where he could go toward the good qualities, or he could go toward the bad qualities. And he was born his mother was the river Ganga, and his father Santanu was out wandering in the woods and came upon Ganga in an earthly form, and was stricken with this great beauty, this great energy coming from her. He said, I want you to be my wife. And she said, okay, I can do that, but you must never question me. You must never question what I do, or I will return I will walk away from you. So they had a number of children, and Ganga ended up killing the first children to fulfill a boon, or to fulfill the reason she had come back. But the 8th child was born, and that was Bhishma. So Ganga, the river of life in the spine, is giving birth to the ego. And Santanu thought that this child also would be killed. So he said he couldn't take it anymore. He said, Ganga, why are you doing these things? He didn't know she was a god. He just thought she was a maiden. Why are you throwing the babies in the river? Why are you drowning them? And she said, well, I will explain it to you, but you've broken your promise, and so now I must leave. And so she took Bhishma away. She didn't kill him, because she said he'd give her that boon. So she took Bhishma away and educated him. And he studied with the great sages. He learned all the arts of warfare. He became a incredible, upstanding, noble youth, versed in all the lore of that time. And when he was 16, he was returned back to his father, Santanu. And Santanu was thrilled to have his son back and just to have this amazing youth there to be his heir to the king. But Santanu got drawn back into, and then Ganga left, so no more wife. Santanu got drawn back into worldly desires, and he became smitten with another maiden, Satyavati, who was a daughter of a fisherman, actually. And he desired to marry Satyavati. But the fisher king, being a wise man, said, well, she's fit to be your queen, but there's one condition. You must make her offspring the heirs to your throne. And Santanu said, I can't do that. I have Bhishma who's going to be the heir to the throne. And so he just went back to his kingdom. But Bhishma perceived, the ego started perceiving the unhappiness that was involved here. And he found out what was going on, and he went to the fisher king and he said, what's happening? She explained the conditions. And furthermore, he said, well, and you must also not have any heirs, because if the sons of my daughter to be the heirs, they can't be displaced by anybody else. So they must come in as well. So Bhishma, wanting to please his father, took the vow that he would not only renounce the kingdom, but he would never have any children. He would be a celibate. He would be the grandsire and just run things behind. So Santanu married Satyavati, they had some children, those children had some children, and we're fast forwarding here. And it got to the point where Bhishma was helping to run the kingdom, but there were two families now who were vying for the kingdom. And this is where it gets into the allegory of the mind. So this whole Mahabharata is really about what's happening in our minds and all the characters or qualities within our own selves. So we now have Bhishma the ego, and he's presiding over two sets of the family, the Pandavas, which represent the good side, the good qualities, and the Kauravas, which represent the material desires, the ones that hang us up in this world. And so Bhishma stands back and he gives direction to both. He loves both equally. The ego can work with both sides of the equation, can work with the material desire and with the good qualities. And he loves the Pandavas, he loves the Kauravas, he's trying to get them to live together. But alas, as we know, at some point, the spiritual tendencies, the Pandavas, don't mix very well with the material desire, the Kauravas. And these two come totally at heads with each other. And there's many, many things that happen, as you all probably know the story, and the Pandavas get banished from the kingdom through trickery, and Bhishma, the ego, tries to warn the material desires. So, this is adharmic. What you're doing is not right. It will bring your ruin. The ego has these periods of light. It's trying to warn this side of it. Don't do this. You are not going to be happy doing this. But they do it anyway. Duryodhana doesn't listen. And the Pandavas get banned for 13 years. And they come back, and it all comes to a head in the big battle of Kurukshetra. And Kurukshetra is just the field of our bodies where these two sides of us are going to come together and fight to the death. Now, what's Bhishma? What's the ego's role in all this? Bhishma is a warrior of unparalleled prowess. No one has ever defeated him. He can wreak havoc wherever he goes as a warrior. He has been in the court all this time while the good qualities, the Pandavas, are off in exile. He's been in the court of the Kauravas and doing what he can and holding sway there. Duryodhana asks him to lead the armies of the material desire side. And he doesn't have a choice. He has to go that way. He's bound by having been in the kingdom, having been in that side. The nature of the ego is going to go with those material desires. It is not going to go with the Pandavas. He still has great respect for the Pandavas. He still has great hope for them. He even predicts that they are going to win the war. But he knows that he must side with the Kauravas. And when he took this terrible vow, this boon was given to him, the vow that he was going to remain celibate and renounce the kingdom. Or the boon was given to him that said, you can choose the time of your own death. So the ego is not going to die easily. It's an unparalleled warrior, and it has to choose the time of its own death. It has to go willingly. It has to offer itself up before it's going to be killed. So Bhishma goes with the Kauravas and begins to start the battle. And this is the famous part where the Bhagavad Gita comes in. It's a very small part of the Mahabharata. The two armies are arrayed, about to do battle. And on the Pandava side is Arjuna, who represents self-control, also represents the devotee. And who's driving the chariot of Arjuna? Krishna, of course, which represents the Guru. And Krishna is advising Arjuna And Arjuna says, how can we ever defeat Bhishma, our grandsire? How can I even fight against him? And Arjuna gives him Krishna gives Arjuna the long discourse of how that's possible, why it's possible, the whole teachings of the spiritual path of what's needed to defeat the ego. And at last, bolstered up, Arjuna says, okay, I will fight. And the battle begins. So in the beginning of the battle scenes, there's just many days of slaughter and carnage and wonderful things that are happening out there on the battlefield. But the important thing for us is, all right, what's happening with Bhishma? Well, Bhishma says, I will fight for you, Duryodhana, but I can never kill the Pandavas. So the ego knows the value of these spiritual qualities. It can never kill that fundamental soul quality there. It can wreak havoc with all the good karma. It can kill all the soldiers on the good side. As a matter of fact, that's what happens. It starts out that the Pandavas are winning a little bit, and Duryodhana comes whining to Bhishma. Says, Bhishma, you're not fighting. You're not doing your best. I know you're the best warrior out there, but look, the Pandavas, they're killing all our men. And so Bhishma, the ego, when pushed by this, becomes angry, becomes his passion came up, and they said that afternoon he was like a tide of fire on the battlefield, just scores and scores of soldiers falling before him, dying like moths in a flame, perishing. Because what happens when the ego is stimulated a little bit, some of these past material desires, when it gets a little push, what happens? It goes back to where it's been for those millions and millions of lifetimes, and it starts fighting, and it fights really hard. And that happens to us sometimes too. Here we are, beautiful devotees in a community, and all of a sudden, it's a housing meeting. And the first chakra kicks in and says, that's my security, I have to have this, I have to have a bedroom, I turn my bathroom, I can't share whatever it is. Or what happens? The second chakra kicks in. I have to have a mate. That's the most beautiful woman. I don't care if she's not on the path. I'm going after her. Or the third chakra kicks in and says, I don't have any money. I'm too poor here. How am I going to survive? I got to go out and get a job. Look, I got this career opportunity. I could become a famous person. I'm going. So, it happens. When the ego is challenged, which way does it go sometimes? It goes back on the side. So, okay, what happens? So back in the battlefield, at that time battles had rules, so that they had to stop at night. And the Pandavas got worried. They said, whoa, when Bhishma's like that, what the heck are we going to do? So they went to see Bhishma. I mean, you can do that in this time of age. There was still some dharma. So they went to Bhishma's tent and they say, Bhishma, what are we going to do? And Bhishma gives them the key to his demise. So the ego participates in its own death by drawing that teaching, drawing the guru, drawing those things that it needs, and it tells the Pandavas, here's what you need to do. And it was a ruse. There was Shikandan was a soldier who was born as a woman, and through austerities got a boon to become a man, and Bhishma says, I will never fight a woman. So bring Shikandan as Arjuna's charioteer. But it's Arjuna who must kill me. Now, why is it Arjuna that must kill me? The only thing that can oppose Bhishma, the ego, is Arjuna, self-control. There has to bring that element of discipline, of self-control, of the spiritual path, guided by who? Guided by Krishna, the charioteer. The charioteer guiding self-control, guiding the discipline of the spiritual path, is what can defeat Bhishma. And that's what happens. They have this ruse, the shield. Bhishma doesn't resist. He's filled full of arrows from Arjuna. So the arrows of sadhana, the arrows of devotion, the arrows of right practice fill up Bhishma, and he falls out of his chariot. And he doesn't touch the ground because there's so many arrows in him that he's held up suspended above the battlefield. And he doesn't die because he has to choose when to die. And he says, I'm going to choose to die. I'm going to be alive until the equinox. And he starts giving good counsel and good advice. And the last thing that he does is that he actually gives a discourse on dharma to the Pandavas, the winning side, before he dies, after the battle is long over with. So the ego at some point we'll succumb, and it needs to be shot full of our arrows, of our best intentions and our sadhanas. And it can be a great help drawing what's needed, drawing what we need to do. And in this case, Bhishma offered himself up to Krishna. He said, I know this is a higher dharma. I know what I've been supporting Duryodhana is not the right thing. And he gives himself up and he dies. So where does all that leave us? Of course, we know that Bhishma, our ego, is a formidable foe. It means we need to have a guru. It means we need to have self-control. It means we need to do our utmost to defeat this person, this part of us. And it could be, you could get pretty upset or daunted by the prospects of this, of fighting the ego, and I'm sure we all have many times, but there's a couple of things that we need to hold on to. And that's the fact that it's not just slogging through a desert, day after day and trying to reach this goal that remains ever elusive, and you're climbing these crags and you're thirsty and breathless and you can't make it and you give up. It's not like that. There's things along the way. There's touches of grace from the masters. There's touches of a glimpse from God. There's once I was hiking in Denali National Park, Mount McKinley, and there's this great big massif. It's not only the biggest mountain in North America, it actually rises up out of a plain quite a ways. And Alaska is prone to a lot of clouds. And so as we were hiking in, it was completely cloudy, completely covered over. And we hiked up this valley where we were going to go, and it was cold, and it was rainy, and we were tired, and we were hungry, and we didn't even know where we were going because we could hardly see more than a couple hundred feet ahead of us. And we finally made camp. And then at that point, the light started to change, and this mist all around us took on this golden glow. It was starting to lift. And the flowers, we hadn't even noticed there were flowers there, suddenly picked up the light. And the fog lifted some more, and we could see the ridge farther behind. And we could see the next mountain. And all of a sudden, the whole thing parted, and there was Denali. And Denali is an incredibly spectacular mountain. It sits out there by itself. And we were just completely awestruck. And we just stopped what we were doing. We were in the middle of cooking dinner, and we just, hung with our mouths open. And that's what it's like sometimes on the spiritual path. That fog can lift. And there he is. There's the goal. There's God. There's all that you need right there in front of you. And then, of course, the fog comes back down. And you remember a little bit that you're hungry, but hold on to those moments, because they do come. We do feel joy. One of the most radical things about the spiritual path is that it's not a slog. It's that the more you do the right thing, the more you oppose ego consciousness, the more joy comes to you, the more inside you feel that this is the right thing. You know where you're going. We also have the tremendous benefit of having the gurus with us. We know the teachings. We know where the right things are. We also have a community around us. We have people who can help us. When we start choosing the material side, they can help bring us back and model back for us that satsanga, company of truth seekers, can help bring us back onto that spiritual path. So whenever you see a picture of the masters around or put one on your altar, just remember, wake up, wake up. This is what they're asking of me. Get out of this sleep of delusion. And when you see another devotee's eyes and the clearness of their eyes, and you see that, you go, leave aside material desires. That's not where I'm going. I am going to God. I know how to do it. I can beat my ego. And of course, Swami Kriyananda. Look at Swami Kriyananda. He's our teacher. He's our guide. He never forgets what he's doing. We forget all the time. Swami Kriyananda never forgets what he's doing. Tune into that consciousness. Model that. Live that. Be one with that. Realize that eternal peace, that infinite bliss, that immortality that is your birthright.